Okay, we're live. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. I've got my computer just directly in front of me today. I changed my orientation a little bit if you've been watching me live in the past. Actually, I'll show you what I have here. With this camera, I can look right down to my work surface down here. So I'm right in front of where I usually paint. And now I have to straighten it out again. We're gonna get started. I'm so excited to have you here. It's a perfect day to start a watercolor workshop. And I was just looking at my stats, and it said I had 639 people here in my little art studio in northern British Columbia. So welcome to you. I'm so glad that you can be here. I see people checking in from literally all over the world. We have viewers checking in from Australia. Victor, you might have been the earliest up this morning, 5 a.m. in Singapore. We have students in the UK, in Sweden, in the Netherlands. I know I'm going to miss some countries in all over the United States, and then fellow Canadians as well. I know I'm missing people checking in from Africa, South America. It is remarkable that watercolor can bring us together just like this. And what better time to do it? Here in British Columbia, where I live, it is nippy out there today. It is minus 25. I think I actually did the conversion to American numbers, and it's like minus 11 for you. So it's chilly today. It's a great day to be indoors and doing a little bit of painting. And it's a great day to be starting watercolor if you've never painted before. The best time to start is today, if you didn't start yesterday. So we're gonna just explore watercolor together, and I'm so glad that you're joining me for this free workshop. We have 3 sessions we're going to be doing over the next 3 days, about an hour, although I reserve the right to stretch it out, keep you as a captive audience, and go on a little bit longer if we need to do so. And I really want to think of this as the same way as I would if I were teaching an in-person workshop. If you were here in my studio and you were just getting to know watercolor, I want to teach you in the same way and share some of the same information that I would share if you were right here. The disadvantage is I can't hand you brushes, I can't give you paints to try, but I can show you what I know and what I love about this beautiful medium, and we're gonna have a lot of fun doing it. I want to talk a little bit about the bootcamp. We're going to cover some details. Anytime you start a watercolor workshop, we spend the first part for sure doing the most amount of talking and explaining how things work. We do have, if you can't stay for the whole session, a replay link will be sent out to you. And actually you can use the same link that you received in your welcome video. This link stays active, and you can even share it with your friends. If you got a lot of good insight from this lesson, please do feel free to go ahead and share that. We do have a limited amount of time for questions, but I will answer as many as I can. And Robin, who's my assistant, she's my operations manager, and she helps keep me organized. And she'll be keeping an eye out for great questions asked in the chat that we can talk about at the end of the broadcast. So you can feel free to ask those questions during the lesson. A number of people who are watching are people who are already students of mine, students in my Fearless Artist community, and have taken my online classes. And so they'll often have answers for you, even if I don't see your question right away. Where are we at here? I want to tell you a little bit about who I am, and I also want to encourage you to stick around, because I'm going to tell you how you can be entered to win our grand prize. Not only are we giving you this free watercolor workshop, but we're giving away a $500 grand prize at the end of our 3 sessions. You do have to enter once each day, and the link for that to enter will be available at the end of the broadcast. So don't worry about it right now. We'll mention it again as we wrap up. What to expect. My goal for you. It is to encourage you and educate a little bit about this beautiful medium. I have found with watercolor that there are far too many students who start painting because they really, really want to, and then give up for some reason. They get discouraged and quit. And I just think this is a travesty. It's a really, really a shame that anybody should feel like they can't do it. Like you just don't have what it takes to be the artist you want to be. And I think that's solvable, and I want to share that in this workshop. I am not, well, I do have a course that I'd love for you to join, my Learn Watercolor the Heart-Led Way, which will expand upon what we're covering over the 3 days of this lesson. I'm not wanting to, my cat just knocked over something outside and she's looking all concerned. She's enjoying sitting in the sun today. I'm not here to really promote or sell anything as much as just to help you fall in love with this beautiful medium. If you fall in love with watercolor, you're going to seek out great instruction that will help you grow, and I'm confident in that. Just double checking the chat here. We've got lots of comments here, and Robin's linking up as well resources to help you. She's linking up the course I just mentioned, and yeah, seeing great comments. Okay, if you're one of my existing students, if you're in my Fearless Artist community, go ahead and say so in the chat. Say hi to everyone. Let them know that you're there and can answer their questions or give a testimonial if they're looking for some information. And if you've never taken a course from me, if this is your first time really diving into watercolor, I know that I want to know that too. I noticed there were a number of you commenting, telling us your ages, which we don't require, but it made me laugh because the emails I get more than anything else are from people who are saying, I'm 73, is it too late for me to start? I'm 65 and I'm going to start watercolor now. I'm 82 and watercolor is something I'm just getting to know. It's funny because I'll get emails from 55-year-olds saying the same thing and 43-year-olds who feel like they're starting too late. And you know what? It does not matter. Now is the right time. You have everything you need to be the artist you're meant to be today. I have myself been painting in watercolor for 26 years this month. I took my very first watercolor class when I was just 18 years old. And for me, watercolor has been a lifelong journey. But I also have many years where I almost didn't paint at all. And so, I've never felt like I really, you hear somebody say they were painting for 25 years and boy, that's so much time. And I really feel like I never made the use of the time that I could have, to feel really good about it. And yet somehow along the way, even if I only painted, once a month, I saw myself slowly growing and building on the skills I learned at the beginning. And that gave me the confidence, realizing that what I was learning was cumulative, even when I wasn't being very diligent. That gave me freedom to learn watercolor my way. And that's been really something that has stuck with me over the years, really wanting to be guilt-free in my process. I think I should show you actually some of my early paintings. So let's just switch the camera and we can take a look at my work surface. And so, yeah, we'll zoom in a bit. For some reason, this camera is recording really yellow today. This was one of the very first paintings I did. I think this was before any lessons, I was probably about 16. The paper quality is not very good. And the imagery is very simplistic. But this was a start. This was a painting that helped to make me the artist that I am today. Here's another one. Silhouette paintings are a great place to learn about light and dark values and contrast, but they also feel really easy and approachable. And so I like seeing this in my past catalog of art. And 1994, I was 17 years old. And then I took my first watercolor class at the age of 18, about a year later. And this was one of my first paintings, and I see some strengths in this. I see my ability to really grow my observation skills. I see good observation skills in the way I painted the light and contrast here. And I also see some very strong weaknesses. And here's another one I did in that very first class. This was a great exercise from my instructor, having us paint white objects, and so that we could focus on the shadows and shapes. And it's kind of an academic subject when you're painting white objects and capturing those shadows. But again, it's sharpening observation skills. as well as learning how to manage and handle the medium. So those are just a few of the paintings that I did when I was just getting started. I'm so glad that I kept them and didn't just throw them away when they started to look bad because, or unskilled, because, you know, now I can look back at them and be thankful for the artist that I was and what it took to become the artist I am today. You know, everything, these all contribute to who I am as an artist. As we get started, I actually thought it was important for me to share my mission statement. And these are essential truths that make me the artist that I am. And I wanted to share them with you because there are artists out there whose number one priority is high technical skill and perfect paintings. And for a very long time, I thought that I needed to make perfect paintings in order to feel accomplished as an artist. And I have never made a perfect painting yet. All of my paintings are full of unexpected surprises. To me, it feels like perfection is something that you control every step of the way. You have an outcome in mind, and then you achieve that exact outcome in your paintings. And that's not the artist I am. I've found that I've started to describe myself as a heart-led artist. My desire is to make authentic art that is true for who I am and expresses who I am today. That's constantly evolving because I'm changing as a person as I grow and as I age. And it brings characteristics of my life into my art and vice versa. So I'm just going to read to you. I've got this little sheet and it looks long, but bear with me, these things matter. And the first thing that I wrote at the top of the page is authentic art or heart-led art is fearless. I don't mean that I don't have fear. I was feeling quite anxious as I started thinking about this workshop and what I wanted to share with you and how many people were signing up. And it felt, you know, a little intimidating. Who am I to present this to you? But what I've learned changed who I was as an artist. It made me who I am. And fearless for me doesn't mean not being afraid, but it means that fear gets put in the corner so I can do the job. I can go and tackle that goal. I can pour myself into my work. Fear is there, but it does not drive. Fearless art for me, or heart-led art, is patient. It recognizes that I am climbing a mountain, that I need to take that first step and then the next one, and I don't see the outcome, the end destination necessarily. Often that mountain peak is shrouded in cloud. Maybe there's a blizzard at the top as we climb. The trail twists and turns and we don't feel like we're moving up all the time. And yet it is a lifelong journey, and there is growth that is happening. We're getting there. We're progressing on the journey. Authentic art is forgiving. I don't see mistakes as condemnations of who I am as an artist, but they are the proof that I'm learning. Authentic art is vulnerable. I'm willing to create art that is flawed, that doesn't always show high technical skill, in favor of being authentic and showing who I am. Authentic art is imperfect. This idea of having a gift or being gifted, and we're going to talk about this later, it's actually a myth. We want to embrace our imperfections, recognize that sometimes our obstacles are our superpowers, and fight our way through that fear of the blank page. My authentic art is also hardworking. I recognize that whatever I'm doing right now for my painting is okay as long as I am doing something. I'm building skill. I can't build all the skills at the same time, so I focus on small pieces and I build on those. Authentic art is self-caring. I want to value my process instead of thinking about how much it costs. Authentic art is insightful. I'm forever looking at what holds me back. What do I need to let go of in order to make the art I'm meant to make? Authentic art seeks mentors and not gurus. I wanted someone to tell me what to do, but rather I found my best teachers were people who came alongside of me and allowed me to be the artist I was meant to be. Authentic artists are determined. I will achieve because I refuse to give up. They are trusting. We trust that the process of painting and showing up every day is creating in us the outcome that we desire. We're fun-loving. We want to work from a place of love and playful experimentation, and I'm really going to have fun demonstrating that today. We are seekers. We are relentlessly curious. We want to ask what if as we paint. And I'm going to show you some of my what ifs in just a moment. We're reflective. We look back and we celebrate how far we've come. We just did that. I got to show you some of my old paintings and celebrate that, they made me the artist I am today. And we're long-term and forward-looking. We know that our art journey is about more than any one painting. What we're doing is cumulative, and we get to keep building on each successive victory, and we get to improve upon our failures as well. And we're open to change, and we recognize that course correction is standard. Years ago, I thought that I was meant to be a realistic botanical artist, and I really have made an about face since then. And I love the art I'm making now. And that happened because I was willing to try a new direction and to kind of follow that train of that relentless curiosity that I was talking about. So that's my mission statement. That's what I value about my art process. And I would encourage you, as you get started painting, it is so easy to get sidetracked by wanting to accomplish great things, by pride and fear and ego, and that person who looks at your art and says, it would be better if it looked more like the photo. And maybe that wasn't your intention. And it's easy to just get off track. And so writing down your goals, what do you really want to take away from this art process? That can be really valuable to help keep you grounded and centered. And I keep this list it's taped to my wall. It's getting a little bit battered and I might need to rewrite it, but I keep it taped to my wall where I can see it every day when I come into the studio because it's so important to me. Okay, moving on. I want to get started. I want to start introducing you to watercolor supplies. I know that one of the most intimidating things for a new artist can be walking into that art supply store and figuring out what to buy. For some things, you can get away with the cheapest product, and for others, you want to spend a little bit more so that painting is easier for you. I want learning to paint to be as easy as possible for you, to not work with materials that fight you, but also to know where you can save your money. And so we're going to look at some supplies here. I see a request from Kay. Will I send out in an email the list I just read? I totally should, shouldn't I? We'll try to follow that up in an email after the broadcast for sure. Okay, so let's look at the work surface and just shift over because I'm getting tired of looking at my face on the screen. And we're going to take a look at some supplies. First of all, I want to show you this palette right here because it's very special to me. This is my very first watercolor palette. I bought it as an 18-year-old starting my first watercolor lesson, and I filled and refilled it for 25 years. Recently, a few years ago, I upgraded to a studio palette, this beautiful palette, which is from robax.com. Robin will share a link. This palette, I love it, but I also am very hesitant often to show it to new artists because you can see it holds 64 colors and you do not need 64 colors. So don't even think about this palette. In fact, they would probably hold you back. We want to start with a small range of colors so that you can get to know a base palette and then build on that. Get to know those colors, get to know how they interact with each other, and then over time, you can start adding in new colors and incorporating them into your work process. So one thing I'll point out here is I have pre-filled this palette myself using tube watercolor paints. So these tube paints are actually your best value for the money. My hands are shaking. You can buy pre-filled palettes. They're called pan paints. This is one made by Daniel Smith, and this one actually comes with 6 colors and then empty spaces for you to add your own. And Daniel Smith is one of my favorite brands. But that's something I want you to make up your mind on yourself. So it's a good idea not to lock yourself into spending a ton of money on supplies at first. Take your time, buy a few colors, try some different brands, see what you feel good about, see what feels intuitive to you. This palette is made by Core, and it's a beginner or a basic range of colors as well. And it's got a little mixing space as well. Now these are pan paints. They are pre-filled into the palette. They are little cakes of paint, and gram for gram, the tubes are a better value. But often beginner painters will gravitate towards the pans since kind of the work is done for you. The pans have been pre-filled, someone else picked out the colors, and you get a range of different hues. One thing I want to point out is just the different colors you're going to want to look for as you get started. And this palette is a really good example. Actually, I'll set this down and zoom in so we can really see. Whether you're buying pans or tubes, what you're going to want to look for is a range of your primary colors. In this case, that means a warm red and a cool red, so like a tomato red and a magenta, a warm blue, like a royal blue, and a cool blue, which is a little closer to turquoise, or the cyan that you would get in a printer cartridge. And then up here we see a cool yellow, which is a kind of a lemony yellow, and then a warmer yellow. And so these 6 in this corner right here are a really good beginner palette, because from these 3, which are the same colors you would put into a printer cartridge, you can mix a beautiful range of bright, clear colors. Now, Core has given us a few more great colors to work with. They've given me 2 browns. They've given a dark, that looks like a dark green to me, a green gold, which is, so now we have 2 greens to work with that we don't have to mix, a violet, and this violet is so dark that it could also be used to mix some darkest dark colors, and an orange. So we have some secondary colors. Secondary colors, we use that term because they're mixed from 2 of our primary colors, our main 3 colors. I like having a few secondary colors on hand, so a nice little range of 9 to 12 colors is a great place to start. In that very first palette that I started out with, you can see we have something similar. We've got I've actually got 2 pinky reds and 2 orangey reds in this one. I've got an indigo, which is a very deep, dark navy blue. And I've got a couple of blues here. I also ended up putting a turquoise blue over here because I didn't plan very well when I set up this palette. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 18. And then I have a very dark violet again. And I think this is another dark blue, to tell you the truth. Some greens, and then a couple of yellows here, again, poorly spaced, and some more green, and then a brown. So, that range of colors, trying out different things, getting to know them is a really good place to start. Regarding paint, the main thing I would encourage you with is that I would go to an art supply store to buy your paint. I once taught a workshop where I had students who, I think they must have bought their paint at Walmart or one of those big box stores, and the consistency of the paint was a lot like painting with Jell-O. There was almost no pigment in the paint, and so they were really struggling. And so at an art supply store, you're going to get student grade, cheaper grades of paint, but many student grades are very, very good. And I encourage students, if you can't afford to buy artist quality, go ahead and buy the student grade and then upgrade when you start to notice a difference. And that's a good rule of thumb for most art supply or most art products. Upgrade when you notice a difference. So we're going to set those aside. We've kind of covered color, and I know there's lots of other questions about color and about the different colors I use in my palette. I don't want to give you specific names of colors because what happens is you may not be able to find that color name in the brands that are available in your area. We have such an international group here. Talking about brand names can get really confusing. For some of you, Daniel Smith is not available in your area. For others, you're working with brands I've never heard of. So I would encourage you rather to look for those color characteristics, that magenta, cyan, and yellow, just like your printer cartridge. And then those warmer hues of like a tomato red, a school bus kind of yellow, and a royal blue to round out your palette. Regarding brushes, let's talk about those next. So I just have an assortment of brushes here, and basically these are probably what I would suggest to be your first choice when you're getting started. I like a round brush because you get a nice point as well as a round body that carries a lot of paint. So you can use the side of the brush to make a broad stroke and the point of the brush for detail. And so round brushes are what I use 90% of the time. 95% of the time you're going to see me working with round brushes. They come in synthetic or natural fibers, the bristles. And if you're a beginner, I've found most beginners tend to prefer a synthetic bristle brush because the synthetic brushes, just going to give you a white background so you can see the shapes of the brushes a bit better. The synthetic brushes tend to hold a little bit more firmness and snap, and that feels more controllable for new painters. The good news is synthetic brushes are more affordable than natural hair brushes, and so they're a good choice. Personally, I like natural brushes or brushes that are made to mimic natural hair as closely as possible because the softness of the natural hair is a little more organic, and they hold just a little bit more paint and water. So over the years, I've started to gravitate more toward natural brushes. Again, that's a personal preference, and you get to decide what you like most. We're actually not even going to look at flat brushes. They can be useful for filling large areas of color, but we're going to be mostly painting in around 8 by 10, 5 by 7 inches. So working with smaller paintings. A smaller painting makes it easier for you as a beginner because you'll have a little more ability to manage the drying of the various parts of the page if you're working on a smaller piece of paper. Just pausing for a second for a drink of water and taking a look at any questions. I've seen lots of great comments regarding supplies and resources for purchasing supplies. And I know because you're from all over the world, we're getting some good suggestions on where to shop and who has the best deals. So thank you for sharing that in the comments. This really is just like a watercolor class where we are collaborating and able to share what we've learned together. Okay, let's talk about paper, and I've saved this one for last. Actually, we're really going to save it for last, and I want to show you a few other things that I tend to need as I paint. One of those is masking tape. When I am painting, I want to have a flat surface to paint on, and paper, when it gets wet, it wants to buckle and curl. And so masking tape will hold my paper flat onto my painting surface. And here's an example of a painting I was working on and never got around to finishing, apparently. This one, I took my sheet of watercolor paper, I taped all 4 sides, and in the beginning of the painting process, especially when I'm using the most water, it's really nice to have that nice flat surface to work on. As the paper gets wet, the tape holds it in place. There are debates about whether or not you should do more to prepare your paper than just tape it down. I'm not going to participate in that debate. What I like to do is just start painting. There are artists who stretch their paper. It involves wetting it and stapling it and waiting for it to dry. That is not what I do. I want to get right to business. And so this masking tape is the way I do it. But sometimes you don't even need masking tape. I just want to show you. This is Hanamula's The Collection watercolor paper. And this is a block of paper. And when you're shopping for watercolor paper, you will often see pads of paper where you have paper that is glued at the top. And this is a pad from Arsh. And so we just have it glued at the top and the pages are loose like a notepad. These I would tear off and tape onto my painting board. And I totally forgot to mention that my painting board is a sheet of corrugated plastic. This is the same product that you would find at that they used to make election signs and realty signs. So I actually do buy it at my local sign shop, or you can find it at a hardware store. Sometimes it's called Coroplast. And I don't believe it's quite the same thing as Gator board. It is completely plastic, just like a sheet of corrugated cardboard, but plastic. And I like them. They're waterproof, they're lightweight, they can be cut to exactly the size you usually paint with. As you can see, my paper fits pretty much perfectly on this board. So I have lots of these on hand for my paintings. So if you're buying a watercolor pad or loose sheets of watercolor paper, you're going to want to tape it down. But sometimes you'll find watercolor blocks, and these are pads of paper that is actually glued on all four sides. So you can see the black here that shows the adhesive, and that holds the paper. So some artists, new artists, when they buy a block, they think, I just got one piece of paper because you can't see the individual sheets. But what these do is they take away that step of needing to tape your paper down. You can start painting right away because the adhesive is holding the paper in place. And then once your painting is dry, there's a little gap here at the top. And I use a palette knife to just insert right in here. And then I can slit all four sides to loosen that piece of paper. Watercolor paper is going to be your greatest expense in watercolor painting. The paint squeezed into your palette will last a long, long time. The brushes will last for years, and I have brushes I've had for 20 years. And so what you're going to see yourself using the most is paper. Now, the good news is it feels expensive when you go to buy it the first time. It's really not. If you can give yourself a budget, I would suggest, try out a budget of about $20 a month and see how much paper that gets you. For me, that usually buys me one of these pads. And if you're learning to paint, you probably want to tear these sheets in half and work in smaller sizes. That's 12 sheets here, so we tear them in half. That's 24. We can paint on both sides, so that gives us 48 paintings. That's well more than one a day. That's going to give you lots of brush miles to help you grow skill in watercolor. I also like to evaluate my cost of paper based on the creative therapy it provides. And I know that if I were using some other resource for my mental health, well, actually, my husband builds hot rods. So if you're building a car, I can tell you it's a lot more expensive creative therapy than watercolor painting. And he makes amazing cars, but he does know it's going to be an expensive hobby to have. The reason I'm talking about expense is because when you go to the art supply store, and this is the hard thing, I just see comments about paper being intimidating. This is the hard thing, is that you will see student grade paper on the shelf that is much cheaper than these pads that I'm showing you. There are a couple of things that I always look for when I'm shopping for watercolor paper, and I will not buy watercolor paper if it does not have these qualities. Number one is 100% pure cotton. Something about cotton allows watercolor to move in a way that is so beautiful and alive and flowing. When I have worked with cellulose blend papers, that's like they've got wood pulp in them, somehow the paint just wants to sit there. We don't get the same life and movement. And it's kind of a woo-woo way to talk about watercolor paper, but it just is true. I see movement and intuitive action that happens on cotton paper. The other thing that happens is watercolor paper is made of, yes, cotton. That is the better quality paper. It also has a product called sizing, and the sizing is what allows the paint or the paper to take the paint. If it wasn't for the sizing, I think your paper would react very much like a piece of paper towel, where it would be blotchy, the paint would just soak in, it wouldn't have the flow and movement that we see when paper is correctly sized. So I really like to be able to take a look at paper by opening up the pad and actually looking at it. And if you're at an art supply store, they often have samples. In fact, Hanamula will provide samples of their paper, and you can write in to them and request that. I'm thinking that's just for North America, but they do have beautiful samples, and many art supply stores carry samples of paper as well, so you can take it home and try it for yourself. But I like to be able to touch the paper and just feel the texture, because the student quality paper often has a slippery feeling that you're not going to find with the better watercolor papers. They almost have a little bit of, we call it tooth, but I would say almost a peach fuzz quality, where you can touch them and you can just feel a hint of roughness. And don't go handling the full sheets of watercolor paper on the shelf. No one wants to buy a piece of paper that has fingerprints all over it, but you can ask at the store to try some samples of the paper. And in fact, many of the online stores as well sell sample packs of their best quality papers. So that's something to think about. Personally, I like to work with cold pressed paper. It's kind of a well-rounded, middle of the road texture of the paper. The other options are hot press, which is very smooth, and rough, which is a little rougher. And yeah, that's the main thing I focus on, though, is looking for that 100% pure cotton. And if I can, just feeling that texture and looking for that little bit of peach fuzz that lets me know that my paint is going to flow and settle onto the paper in a beautiful way. We have lots of comments regarding paper. Personally, I like to buy my paper at sales. I do like a good deal. And I like to actually buy, if I can get a really good deal, I will actually buy my paper at like a Boxing Day sale and have a year's supply on hand. I hate running out of paper. Okay, we want to do some painting. Let's just take a look and see if there's any other topics I'm forgetting to mention as we get started. I think we're going to try to set up to paint, and I can show you some watercolor techniques. I have two water containers here, and right now they're both full of clean water, but with my working method, I use one of these to clean my brush, and the other one I use whenever I need clean water. I know that I try to keep this one always clean enough that I can make nice clean mixes of color as I paint. And I've totally buried my notes under art supplies here. Okay, I'd love to hear from you if you've heard some things about watercolor as you've thought about getting started. What do you know about watercolor and its character? What is watercolor like? Go ahead and leave a comment just down below. I can tell you some good qualities of watercolor. Watercolor is a transparent medium. That means it is, we work with white paper, and that white paper always shows through. And that's one thing I love about watercolor. I'm waiting for some comments. I've got a question regarding Canadian sources for watercolor supplies. I actually have a document, a link to that on my website, so Robin can share that, some of my favorite Canadian sources for watercolor paper. Okay, I've heard Stephanie's commenting, watercolor has a mind of its own. I like that phrase, actually. That's more flattering than some of the things I've heard. Watercolor is exploratory. It's movement, it's blendiful, it's beautiful, blendiful. That's like beautiful, but with blending. Okay, Wendy, here's a good one. Wendy says, I was told it was a hard medium to do and I shouldn't bother. Yeah, I've heard that one. Watercolor gives me permission to color outside the lines. Watercolor has a mind of its own. It can move around after it's placed and look different. Watercolor is easy to clean up. Yes, I love that quality. Watercolor is unpredictable. Watercolor is easy to get mud. Watercolor is a fluid mystery. I love these. Watercolor is unforgiving. Yes, it's okay to say if you've heard negative things about watercolor, we can talk about that. Watercolor is hard to plan for the white areas. Yes. Watercolor takes a lot of planning. Blendiful, yes. Okay, so let's do some blendiful stuff here. Watercolor for me, one thing I heard so often, and I got so tired of it, was that watercolor is the hardest medium. Have you heard that? So watercolor is the hardest medium. The other thing I often heard, I'm just going to tape my board in half here as we play with some techniques. I also heard that you can't fix mistakes in watercolor. Anybody else heard that? Patty W says, I remind myself to surrender to the medium of watercolor. Linda says, liberating. Oh, I love this. I was really hoping that you wouldn't all just have negative things that you've heard about watercolor, because unbelievably, that was what I heard when I started painting. I heard negative things, and it was so frustrating to hear people say things like, you can't fix mistakes in watercolor. And sorry, I'm just going to bring it back up here. I want to look at you as we talk about this. It was, I would hear these things and they came across as negative. You can't fix mistakes in watercolor. Watercolor is hard to control. Watercolor is the hardest medium. You should never do this in watercolor. You should always do this in watercolor. I heard a lot of do's and don'ts, and they were limitations and barriers for me. Watercolor, rather than saying you can't fix mistakes in watercolor, let's look at watercolor's character. Watercolor is transparent. Nothing can be hidden. What we put into watercolor shows up on the paper. That is actually a good thing. That's an excellent quality. What you feel will show in your brush strokes, and what is underlying your final layer is visible as well. We get this depth. We also are told that you can't control watercolor. That is also a good thing. Watercolor is alive. I really consider myself to have a relationship with watercolor. We have been getting to know each other for the past 26 years. And painting with watercolor for me is a collaboration. It's me and the paint and water showing up together and working together. We have this unexpected joy and mystery. And I know there was that comment about watercolor's mystery here, a fluid mystery. And okay, last one, watercolor is the hardest medium. Is watercolor hard? Is piano hard? Is running a marathon hard? Is healthy eating hard? All of these things are difficult sometimes, but there's a reason people do them. It's because they are worth it. It's because something in us is craving that thing. And we do them because we love them, because they're valuable, and because they're worth it. We seek to find a sweet spot where we know we've taken on something that's difficult, something that will require an investment of our time and that will feel difficult, while choosing to love the new adventure. And we are on a new adventure. I want to share my final pet peeve. This is something that really irks me, and I still get it here after 26 years of painting in watercolor. Someone will see a painting of mine and tell me I am gifted. I have so much talent. And truthfully, I worked on that for 26 years. That painting looks the way it does because I have 26 years of investment into learning watercolor, into understanding its character and working with it. So being gifted doesn't really show into it. If I look at my old paintings, I don't see someone with a gift. I see someone who loved something and wanted to do it better, and showed up and loved it and wanted to do it better day after day after day after day. So let's not think about whether or not we have the gift or have what it takes. We can enjoy watercolor just because it's beautiful and because we get to work with it. If you're here today, I know it's because you love watercolor and you're into paint, and the rest is skill. We do not give, and I've told this story so many times, we do not give a 3-year-old a pencil for the first time and expect that they're going to form the letters of their name perfectly. You know, we are proud of them for just making the attempt, and we have every confidence in them that, you know, they will learn to write, they'll learn to form the letters of their name, possibly even get a legible signature somewhere along the way. We don't take the pencil out of their hands and say, well, I guess you just don't have what it takes to write your name. We know that over time, skill will develop and make them the writer they're meant to be. And we can believe that about our art too. So trust yourself. As you lean into this new process, the last thing you want to do is get so focused on learning that you stop having fun. We're going to really work on enjoying this. I cannot promise you it's going to take a certain length of time to get good at watercolor, to feel like you know what you're doing, but I can help you to really enjoy the journey. And we're going to do that today. Let's start painting. I'm tired of talking. Let's paint. Okay, so here's my watercolor paper. I've divided it in half. And you know, the funny thing is I'm going to show you some watercolor techniques, but you would do these techniques whether or not I showed them to you, but I get to tell you why we do them and what they are. So I'm just taking a look at my list here. Okay. You may have heard the old adage, know the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist. That is the truth. We get to break rules as we learn to paint. I'm going to tell you some guidelines for using watercolor, but they are guidelines. They're not really laws. Most of the time, watercolor is going to behave a certain way if you handle it a certain way. And it's going to be easier to know that about it. But if you want to go a different way, if you want to try different things, you're allowed to do that. We're going to start by painting wet and wet. And the final tool I want to show you, we should have showed it to you earlier, is my spray bottle. This is probably, as an intuitive painter, this is probably the tool I use more than anything else. I really love this spray bottle. We're going to start by just wetting this half of the paper. And this was actually the very first time I used watercolor. I was in 7th grade. I was 11 years old. And my art teacher had us paint in watercolor. And all we would do, I think I must have filled 20 pages, running the paper under the sink, under running water, and then dropping in color. And you know what? It's still, it was so much fun then, and it's still fun now. I'm just going to moisten that. And since we are being beginners today, I'm going to use this little palette, very much like one you might already have, something small. I like to moisten my palette when I start as well. I don't know if anyone was asking, why not use paint wet from the tube? And I have a good reason for that. Let's talk about it. If I'm squeezing my paint wet from the tube, I'm just going to put a tiny dab there on the lid there. Oh, and by the way, if you open a paint tube and the paint starts oozing out the top, all you need to do in order to, see it's oozing out like that. What you want to do to get it back in the tube is just go down to the bottom of the tube and squeeze. Squeeze the base slightly, and that will kind of create a reverse effect and suck it back in. Isn't that handy? If I'm working with wet paint just like this, I really find it's actually very hard to control wet paint because I grab a little bit more. I could take that whole dab up with my brush. I start to paint, and this is Mayan Violet. It's a beautiful color. I start to paint, and if I have excess paint on my brush, it's going to end up in my paint water. And so I end up using more paint than I would otherwise if I'm using it straight from the tube. Additionally, if I squeeze out more than I need, I don't have a way to put it back in the tube, so it's going to dry and get hard in my palette one way or the other. So what I like to do is just soften the paint by spritzing it with water. That loosens up the top layer of paint, and then with my brush, I'm going to grab the magenta here. I'm just going to spend a minute here working up the paint and loosening up some of the paint off the surface. And then I get, oh, that's so pretty, a nice brilliant color dropped into my wet paper, and I can start to see it move. Now I want to point out that I am tilting my board. Gravity is helping me right now. I have this little box. Used to have salt in it, of all things, but I love this little box. It's just the right angle to tilt my board and let some gravity help. Gravity lets the excess water move off the paper rather than having puddles in the middle of the page. And then I can, if it's pooling at the bottom, I can just blot it with a paper towel. That's another handy tool you're going to want to have in your studio or at your kitchen table or wherever you choose to paint. Now water equals movement. So the wetter the paper, the more movement I'm going to get. And that means that we're already learning something about this paper that I wet, and that is that the middle was much wetter than the sides. And the bottom is much wetter than the top because we're getting more movement happening there already. So I'm always, and this is a skill set thing that only brush miles can solve, I'm always adjusting my painting process, how much water's on my brush, based on how wet the paper is and how much movement I want to see. So if I'm wanting to put paint down in this lower half of the painting, let's grab some blue here. I don't need much water to see that movement start to happen. Did you see that lovely little whoosh across the page? Let's get in a little bit closer. But if I want to put that same blue up at the top of the paper, I'm going to see less movement because I have less water here. And if it's dry in the corners, which is often where it dries the fastest, is up in that top corner, I might even get a hard edge. Like I can see a hard line right here. We call those edges. So right now what we're seeing in our wet and wet first layer is a lot of softness and very soft edges. Now as I paint, the paper is drying. We have laws of nature that mean that the water on the paper is evaporating and drying. I'm bringing in new moisture with a wet brush. I'm seeing some more movement where things are wetter, and I can actually start to see some colors mix as well. If I put a little more blue on here and let it trickle down into the magenta, I can start to see some color changing happening. So we get to see water's character. It really wants to move and do beautiful things. And yeah, it's just beautiful. As I paint, one thing I'm going to comment on for you, if you're just getting started with watercolor, I would say the biggest struggle you're going to have is learning how to manage the amount of water on the paper. Getting to know that. Very often you worry about it drying too fast and you flood the paper and you just have a puddle where everything flows to the edges and wants to flow away, or things dry much too fast. And climate factors are going to apply here. If your climate is really dry, things are going to dry a little faster as well. So it is something you're going to have to get to know. And this is another reason we like the good 100% cotton paper. It's a little slower to dry and it dries more evenly than those cheaper papers. I'm going to actually encourage a little more flow by bringing in my spray bottle. And one of the reasons my spray bottle is my favorite tool is because sometimes I will put a brush stroke down on my paper that I just don't feel great about. And I'll put down this brush stroke and it's so strong and it just feels like way too much. And I have a few choices. I can panic and use a paper towel to blot it up and lift it off the paper. Now we got to put it back because I want to show you some other methods. Or I can add some water with a wet brush and start moving it around. And as I stir it around here, I'm going to be mixing it with the colors that are already there. But sometimes I just want it to move on its own and do what it wants to do. And I like adding then the spray bottle so it can decide to move on its own. And I can actually use gravity to gently flow the extra color off the page. Now, as I've added color, look at how much of our pink that we've lost from that very beginning. Tomorrow I'm going to try to get a little more light on my work surface. Again, yes, this is the reason why I would ordinarily tape down my paper if I wasn't painting on this block, because all this water, you can already see things starting to buckle a little bit. Even when your paper is on a block or taped down, you're going to see a little bit of rippling happen. That is another reason why we tilt our board. Otherwise, all of the excess moisture would pool in these buckled areas. So it is something to be aware of. And sometimes I'll even tilt my paper another direction just to move some of that excess paint out of those rippled areas. Sometimes because I put the pink down as my first color, it tends that your first color will get overpowered by that second color. So sometimes I like to bring in some of that pink again. And right now I'm just going straight from my palette. We're not going to talk about mixing paint in the palette lid or palette trays today. We're just going to work with a juicy brush and really gently. I really try not to scrub my colors. I want them to move on their own. Reminder, water equals flow. And if you can repeat that to yourself and then notice that about watercolor, you're going to be well on your way to understanding one of the most important characteristics of this beautiful medium. Now I'm going to just touch in a little more water with a damp brush here. This is a juicy brush. I'm going to rinse it. I'm going to knock off that biggest drip that comes off when I take my brush out of the water. I just knock off that one drip. My brush right now is plump and full of moisture. It's a juicy brush. And so if I touch it to the paper, that water that's in there wants to release and flow onto the paper. Sometimes I want to blot my brush, and well, actually sometimes I want to have some color on there, and then maybe blot my brush just slightly and create what I like to call a neutral brush. This is a brush that has the same amount of liquid on it as the paper. So if my paper is mostly dry, my brush is mostly dry. And then I'm going to bring in a very smooth addition of color to the page. And then the third way that I like to handle my brush is a thirsty brush. And that's when I really blot out most of the liquid and I use it as a sponge. And I can actually very carefully lift out color with my brush. So a brush isn't just about adding paint to paper. Sometimes it's about adding moisture to paper, and sometimes it's about taking moisture away. And I blot, and I lift, and I blot, and I lift. And actually, look what I'm getting here. We're going to make this into a landscape tomorrow. Today, we're just going to use that thirsty brush and take this nice little stripe of, kind of a triangular stripe, wider at one side than the other. And I'm going to lift one more time. Okay, so we're gonna ignore this side of the page now for a few minutes, and we'll do one more prep for tomorrow on the other side of the page. And the last thing I do before I set this aside to dry is I just blot any extra puddled moisture that's around the edge of the paper. Sometimes you'll have a pool of liquid down here because I've tilted and gravity's been helping me out. And that pool of liquid will dry more slowly than the rest of the page. And as it dries, it pushes back against the drying paper and creates an edge. And we call that a bloom. Let me see if I can show you. Do I have a bloom that I can show you? Probably in my little stack of goodies here. Okay, this was a painting I was working on yesterday. Right here in this area, you can see little tendrils of color. Now I use this for my sky, so the bloom is a good thing. In this case, it was something that I knew I wanted, but there are often when you have, let's just demonstrate it here. If you put in, as this dries and the color starts to settle into the paper, sometimes we want to keep working with our paintbrush, and most of the time fussing over your painting is more likely to hurt it than help it. If you have an unbalanced amount of water on your brush, if your brush is wetter than the drying paper, that water will release very quickly onto the page, and you can see what it's doing there. It's creating a blotchy bit that's going to probably really stick out like a sore thumb in my painting. So we don't want to do that. We want to keep our moisture balanced, and when we have something pretty like this happening, we want to stop. We want to let it breathe. We want to get to know this painting at this stage. Once this is completely dry, I get to come back in and add more details to it. And watercolor does have a capacity to be very, very layered, and we can keep adding layers as after it's dried. We'll add another layer, take a break, come back, look to see what we can add, and then bring in another layer. So that was a wet and wet wash. It was also a multicolored wash. We have the blue at the top, we had the pink, and then we have a little bit of violet happening as the two colors flow together. In a way, we could call this a graded wash. And very often, if you're taking a beginner course, you'll be taught how to make a flat wash and a graded wash, just as swatches on your paper. Personally, I like to have a little bit of fun with my wet and wet painting. Instead of just making rectangles of different techniques on my paper, why not try to make something pretty? So let's do that on this side. We've got a little bit of time, I think. In just a few moments, I'm going to be telling you how you can enter to win our grand prize. So do stick around for that. We're going to just create a pretty mixture of color here. And I am going to mix color for this. So let's just clean the palette lid here. And I don't clean my palette very often because you get your very best neutrals and grays by using your palette dirt. So my big palette over here, you can see I've got some different shades of blue and green. If I needed to mix a red, I would probably clean one of these. But otherwise, I'm going to keep touching up using these colors in my paintings. And you can see they kind of match what I was doing in this past painting. We've got a few questions about getting rid of blooms, and we are going to actually talk about troubleshooting in, I think it's tomorrow's lesson, common issues and how to solve them. So do come back for that. Okay, so let's do a little bit of color mixing. We're going to take our cobalt blue. It's kind of a nice medium blue. Most people have this in your palette. And I'm going to mix one of my very favorite neutrals using a brown. Now I think this is brown. If it's not, I might have to dip into it. Oh yeah, we've got burnt umber here. I was pretty sure that's what that was. And I'm going to mix it with my blue and see if I can make a nice gray. Right now it's too brown, so I know I need some more blue. Cobalt blue and burnt umber make my very favorite gray. It can be a blue gray by adding a little bit more cobalt blue. There we go. Or it can be a browner, a more brown gray using the burnt umber, just to a little bit higher proportion, maybe a little more blue. I want a stormy blue sky. And we're going to do some more wet and wet today. So let's just wet the paper one more time. I'm going to try not to accidentally spray the first version that we did here. And when you mist your palette, it doesn't always moisten it evenly. So I use a wet brush to go over it again. And the other thing to mention is you might need to wet your paper twice because that first spray of water tends to get absorbed quite quickly. You want a nice shiny amount of moisture on the page, not puddles so much. That's why we tilt. Excess water flows away, but we want a sheen on the paper. And I think you can see that shininess from the light here. We've got questions about using white and black. We are going to cover that as well as we wrap up here. One thing that bugs me is that many paint watercolor palettes that you purchase will have white and black paint, and I don't use them. Okay, so we've got our blue-gray. It's not going to be enough, actually, and I'm going to show you, well, it might be, but I'm going to show you how to keep from running out of a color that you've pre-mixed here. So hang on for that. Okay, we're just going to touch in some of our gray, and we're thinking about a sky right now. Isn't that pretty? I could just stop right there. That's just so pretty. The blue-gray that we have there is a lovely shade, and I do want to add more color. Now, if you're painting, filling an area, and you're worried about running out of color, sometimes you're not worried about it until you do run out, and then you have to scramble to mix more paint while this wash is drying. We don't want that to happen. So I have a method that I like to call the stone soup method of watercolor mixing. It's the idea of you add a little bit of what's already in there every time you reach in to paint. So I just grabbed a little bit of cobalt blue, and as I go to get more paint, I add that little bit of cobalt blue in. I paint a little bit. I pick up a little bit of water with my brush. I add a little water. Grab a little bit of burnt umber this time. and then I paint a little bit more. And so as I paint, I'm always adding a tiny bit more color, a drop more water. And if the color does start to change because my proportions change as I keep touching it up, it's going to change gradually. And so we get a gradual change, a gradual evolution of color, rather than having to try to mix the exact same color after we've always run out. So do think about that. As you paint, you can keep adding to those mixtures so that you don't worry about running out. And we're just going to keep, I want a little white gap here because we're going to use this for our landscape painting tomorrow, and we need a white gap. So you get to practice this on your own today. That's your assignment, your homework, is we want a stormy sky that we can build on tomorrow. Maybe just a few touches of color down at the bottom. And the car building has begun again in the shop next door. My husband is back to his hobby, so you might hear a little bit of power tools in the background. Okay, so we have, just this beautiful soft color. Now this is a place where you can experiment with blooms as well, and we're just gonna, we'll talk about that again some more tomorrow as well. Really, we just want to play with this idea of painting wet paint on wet paper. Your job as you learn to paint is to watch the paint, see what it does. If you can start to notice that when the paper is this wet, this happens. When the paper is getting drier, the brush is going to do a different thing. You're internalizing knowledge that you can use. You're filling your toolbox with strategies that will make your decision making stronger. So this is really powerful. Not to rush, but to slow down and watch the paint. We're not doing a lot of painting today because this wet and wet water management, it's a really big skill. It looks simple and it's fun. It gets to be really enjoyable. This is something that can be fun because you can do it so quickly, and you can try different color combinations. You can mix color in the palette. You can let it mix on the paper. And as you do those things, you're internalizing some really important knowledge that's going to make your painting stronger. The better you're able to anticipate what the paint is going to do on the wet paper with the amount of moisture on your brush that you have, the more intentional your decisions become. And so this gets to be fun and really good learning. So I want you to feel encouraged in that and excited by it. It might feel simple and easy, playful, and like it doesn't have a firm direction that it's taking you. Nothing could be further from the truth. You really are learning a very valuable skill. I just want to cover that question regarding white and black, and then any other questions that have come up, Robin's going to pop them up in the chat here, and we'll cover as many as we can in the next couple of minutes. So let's take a look. I'm running out of throat as well. So we have lots of time. We've got 2 more days of this workshop. So I hope you'll be back tomorrow to continue to learn with me. Okay. We just covered color mixing very briefly, and mixing that favorite neutral. Neutral colors get to be mixed. It almost seems like with watercolor, mixing neutrals is almost the easiest thing, because the longer you move paint around on the paper, the muddier your colors will become. But it's really nice to know that you can get some beautiful neutrals just by choosing, something as simple as the cobalt blue burnt umber. That was my secret trick for many years. And then since then, I've developed other neutrals that I like to mix from the many colors in my palette. But cobalt blue and burnt umber is still an old favorite. Tomorrow we're covering common problems and struggles that you will find as you learn watercolor, and some strategies for dealing with them. I have a number of different ways that I approach fixing mistakes in watercolor when the paint is doing things you don't want to do. Can you fix it? Can't you fix it? Let's talk about that tomorrow as well. I want to cover finally, as we wrap up, the rules for watercolor. I said very briefly earlier, they're really not rules, they're guidelines. They're things that will make learning watercolor easier. You will often hear watercolor artists say something like, never use black, always work from a limited palette, only use transparent colors, things like this. And for a long time, those kind of rules made me feel guilty because I didn't always do those things. And I realized that this is more like advice that artist has found that makes their painting in their way easier. And it might just make your painting easier too, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. We don't use white paint because I think you'll have noticed as we painted, a number of my colors were very, very pale on the paper. We use water as our white and to lighten our colors. So the more water you add to your color, the paler it's going to look on the paper. The paper is our white. And that is why you want to plan, if there's any areas of your painting that need to be pure white, you want to plan ahead and know that that area of the paper needs to stay white. And that will help you as you plan. I've noticed that artists who tend to mix white into their watercolor paintings, you have to be very careful about how you do that, because white, when compared to the white of the paper, can look flat, chalky, or pasty. And that's one reason many watercolor artists stick to avoiding white. They don't want to have to figure out how to do both the white of the paper shining through their painting and to keep their white paint parts from looking chalky. So that's one reason we don't see our watercolor artists using white very often. With that said, I just did a painting actually. It's right here on top, where I did use white, and it created this snowy glow in my painting, which I really liked. So, I try out breaking rules myself all the time. The other color that we often don't see watercolor artists using is black. Most of the time watercolor artists like to mix their blacks because black paint is a color that absorbs light, and every other watercolor hue, it reflects light. The white of the paper glows through, they have a luminous quality, and then you add black paint and it sucks light from the room and it looks flat and dull. And so you'll often, I've noticed sometimes when I'm looking at art online, if an artist has used black paint versus whether or not they've mixed very dark colors to make a black. And the black paint tends to have just kind of a different, like a more dead look. And there's some really luminous darks you can mix by choosing like a deep red and a deep green and combining those. So that's something else to think of, to experiment with and try. We will be doing lots. There are more techniques to cover. We have so much ground to cover. I know I can't cover it all in this free workshop, and we do have an online course that is designed to help you continue to learn watercolor in this heart-led way. We'll be talking more about that through the next 2 days. I also want you to have the chance to win the grand prize. I told you I was going to tell you about it, so here I am. We are giving away a year's membership to my Heart-Led Artist community. We've been calling it the Fearless Artist Community. We're just transitioning it over to be calling it the Heart-Led Artist Community. It's a name change, but the community is all the same. It gives access to 29, I believe, of my online courses. We do live sessions there every month. We have a lot of bonus content to help you become your own favorite artist. We're giving away a free membership worth $300 to that community. And that's a 1-year membership. And we're also giving away a $200 gift card to your favorite art supply store. So you want to have the chance to enter for that. Robin is putting a link in the description below the video to the entry page. You need to enter, fill out the form all 3 days in order to qualify for that prize. But if you can't make those sessions, we're also giving away a $50 art supply gift card every day. So we'll be sending out an email with the list of the winners after the workshop closes. So again, info on how you can enter is in the description below the video. And I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been really fun. My throat is completely dried out, so I'm going to sit down and take a long drink of water. I'm going to take a look at your comments as well. I know there's comments I've missed, questions that we should have covered that we haven't. Thank goodness we have 2 more days. Thank you for joining me. I encourage you to spend some time getting paper dirty. Its purpose is not to stay white. So go have fun with some watercolor, log a few brush miles. The learning that happens as you take time to watch the paint move is really, really valuable. And it helps you make your art education your own when you go and do it. So go and do it. I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye for now.